Okay, I'll call this meeting to order. This planning commission meeting Thursday, March 28th, 2024. May I have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight?
So moved.
Second. And a second. Okay. Any discussion? Okay, Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
No Sinclair. Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. Okay. We've got some minutes to consider here. We have the January 25, February 1st, February 15, and February 22nd. Plan commission meeting minute. To approve. That's, you want to give some backstory on how we, it was just an oversight, I think, on our part that we didn't get all those. So Tessa's just making sure we get them all.
Yes, I was getting caught up, but I was told that whatever had happened the previous month, we want to bring to the next meeting. We just had one nearly every week. So we are getting caught up on 4 meetings here.
Okay. Anybody have any changes to those minutes that they wanted to put forward? Okay, if there's no amendments to the minutes, how about a motion to approve them?
Motion to approve.
Second. Any discussion? Okay, Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Commissioner Moritz,
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. Okay, we're going to move to our first public comment section. So I say first because we'll have 3 opportunities tonight for the public to comment in various capacities. This first public comment section is if someone has something they believe is in the purview of the planning commission and they'd like to bring forward to our attention. First, I'll recognize you, state your name, mailing address, and then you'll have 3 minutes to let us know what's on your mind. There will also be an opportunity for public comment, applicant, opponents, proponents for a legislative, or excuse me, for a judicial, quasi-judicial item we have before us tonight. And then you'll have the chance to make comment before our legislative item. So if you plan to speak on either the legislative or the public or the judicial, please hold your comment until we're at those sections. Does anybody have any public comment they'd like to make on broad or general topics at this time? No one in the audience? Any hands up online? Okay. We'll move on then. Our first item is a quasi judicial hearing, public hearing of SR 24-01, Brent Burton requesting a setback reduction. SR 2401, Brent Burton application requesting a setback reduction to reduce the required front and side yard setbacks in order to construct a single family dwelling on an undeveloped lot located near the intersection of South Hemlock and Center Streets. The subject property, tax lot 04302, map 5103 DD, is located in a residential low density zone. The request will be reviewed under the municipal code section 17.64.010 setback reduction provisions established. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter at this time? Does any commission member believe he or she has a conflict of interest or a personal bias? Has any commission member had any ex parte contacts or made a site visit?
Site visit.
Site visit. May we have the staff report, please?
Good afternoon. The applicant is requesting a setback reduction of the required front yard to 15 feet to 5 feet for the construction of a new single-family dwelling. Subject property has a parcel average slope in excess of 30%, and the applicant's intent is to construct a house on the portion of the lot with the least slope in order to minimize geotechnical impacts. Moving into the applicable criteria for the zoning classification, RL residential lower density zoning. The staff comment is that conceptual plans showing the proposed location of a residence, driveway, and off-street parking have been provided in Exhibit A1. This image is also being shown on the screen at this time. The proposed plan also includes information about topography and shows elevation lines at 1-foot intervals. Prior to the issuance of the building permit, city staff will review a development application for compliance with established standards for the zoning district, including criteria such as the inclusion of a geotechnical hazard report specific to the proposed development, building height, lot coverage, floor area ratio, and off-street parking requirements. Moving into the criteria for a setback reduction. For total building coverage, the subject property measures 9,664 square feet, and the proposed building footprint measures an area of 20 by 40 feet or 900 square feet, which is approximately 9% of the lot. Moving into significant views. There are no identified impacts to views as a result of this proposal. There is no residential or commercial development on the east side of South Hemlock Street that would be impacted by any development on the subject property. Moving into the building location and interference with solar access on adjoining property. There are no identified impacts to solar access for adjacent property owners as a result of this proposal. Moving into the criteria regarding reasonable amounts of privacy, drainage, light, air, etc. Staff comment is that the subject property has significant slopes in excess of 30%, with the steepest portion of these slopes located on the western portion of the property. There is a relatively flat area on the eastern portion of the property. The proposed configuration positions a 20 by 40 foot building footprint on the northeastern corner and a 20 by 60 foot parking area to the west and a driveway running from the parking area to Center Street. The southern portion of the flat area within the 15-foot setback does not appear to be under consideration for development. The portion of that lot accessible from South Hemlock Street by a gravel driveway appears to have been the location of a home that has been demolished. Regarding other impacts regarding privacy, drainage, light, etc., there are no identified hazards as a result of this proposal. Moving into adequate clearance for rights of way. I'm going to change images. So this is regarding adjacent rights of way having sufficient width for the placement of utilities or other public purposes. The figure currently shown on the screen shows the subject property in relation to water distribution infrastructure. This image is from City GIS records. It is not a survey product. A 6-inch PVC distribution line runs along the western portion of the South Hemlock Street right-of-way and comes close to the applicant's eastern property line near the location of the proposed building footprint. Relocation or any other alteration of this line is not possible, as a sewer main line runs north to south through the center of the Hemlock Street right-of-way. The city's Public Works Department has expressed concern about their ability to access infrastructure potentially being impacted by the proposed development. This issue is similar to that encountered when the Planning Commission reviewed setback reduction SR 2301 at 1956 South Hemlock, which is the property here immediately to the north of the subject property. Proximity to water infrastructure, particularly planned seismic valves, was an item of concern for the Public Works Department. The outcome of that application was the approval of a reduction for an upper level porch only in order to provide at-grade access to South Hemlock Street, with the remainder of the house conforming to the 15-foot setback requirement. Moving into the creation of potential traffic hazards or impinging on a walkway or trail. There are no identified traffic impacts that would result from this proposal. Proposed condition of approval number 1 would prohibit the use of the South Hemlock Street frontage for vehicle parking. This portion of South Hemlock Street is posted as a no parking area. Proposed condition of approval number 2 would require the removal of the existing gravel access driveway connecting the property to South Hemlock Street. Moving into encroachment into the setback not substantially interfering or reducing with privacy. Again, there are no identified impacts to the amount of privacy enjoyed by adjacent property owners. And similar to the criteria regarding the ability to provide fire protection, And it is also noted that any plan review would be reviewed by the fire district at the time that a building permit is submitted for application. And that concludes the staff report.
Okay, thank you. Was there any additional correspondence that came in late?
There was a comment from Jeff Taylor, which came in yesterday afternoon and was sent out to the planning commission this morning. In this, it is a single sentence statement that says, "My name is Jeff Taylor. Our property is north of and adjoins Brent Burton's property. Our property address is 1956 South Hemlock. We do not have any objection to the setback reduction that Brent is requesting."
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we'll call for public testimony and state the pertinent criteria to be considered are noted in the staff reports and listed on the criteria sheets on the meeting page of the city's website. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward those criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or municipal code which the person testifying excuse me, believes apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal based on that issue. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional testimony, arguments, or evidence regarding the application. Planning Commission shall grant such request by continuing the public hearing or leaving the record open for additional written testimony, arguments, or evidence. Persons who testify shall first receive recognition from the chair, state their full name and mailing address, and if appearing in a representative capacity, identify whom they represent. Is there a presentation by the applicant?
Yeah, Vito Sorelli, 31897 Maxwell Lane, Arch Cape, Oregon, 97102. I just wanted to follow up with a couple things that were brought up in the staff report. Again, this site was analyzed by the survey team, which shows the contours of the site. So as you saw in the image that was provided by Robert, that half the site is more flat on the east portion of the property, and then it dramatically drops off to the west. So the request for the setback reduction is to situate the building on the more flat and stable ground, which has also been analyzed by a geotechnical report in an initial study. To go along with the slopes, and the reasons for this request is the access to the site, and coming in from the northwest corner, the driveway, the steepness of the driveway substantially improves as we request the setback reduction to the east. So it limits that slope from the driveway to a plus or minus 20-degree slope, which is more approachable from a vehicle access point of view. And then to follow up with respect to the neighbor, the Taylors, I guess they're not posting any opposition. We spent a lot of effort to situate the house and pull it back to the east. So when they potentially build their residence, that this new dwelling for the Mr. Burton would not have any view impact to their residence as well. We've had discussion with contractors and reviewed some of the notes from the city with respect to the water line. We would eventually need to get the water service line located by utility map from a survey that's more accurate than the GIS, but all means and efforts would be put forth to shore and retain the soil from the east portion of the building to the utility line, and similar to a lot of sites, just taking respect to the utilities and not interfering with what's there or any future maintenance that would need to be completed to the utilities. I think Brent Burton's on as well. He might have some comments, but I'm here for any questions or follow-up comments as needed.
Other questions?
Can you,
Just
this is
one.
Brent Burton. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear. Thank you, Mr. Burton.
So maybe.
Go ahead. Mr. Burton, did you want to make any testimony, or were you just asking if we had questions for you?
Oh, I thought you may have some questions for Mr. Sorelli, but I'd be glad to make some addition. basically, supporting what, Vito Sorelli has already told you. He's the, designer, and architect of this project. And the main emphasis, for obtaining the setback reduction, occurs because we are, in a position that we cannot enter or park, on Hemlock Street. And because of that, it has been necessary for us to, acquire, access from Center Street to the west side of the property. But in doing that, we have the grade, which is relatively extreme. And if we don't have a setback reduction, it means that the west side, the west wall of the house, would be set back 10 feet without the setback reduction, and that would result in a grade of 25% or more driving up the driveway into a garage under the house. And of course, that would be just unacceptable. And of course, the alternative is to have some parking on Hemlock, which of course, by city mandate now is not possible. And I should add that we've gone to extensive work in order to establish that driveway access. I've been working with my neighbor, Mr. Taylor, to the north, in regard to that driveway, so that we can have some access off of Center Street, and that's the only street that we can get access to the house. So that's the number one issue in my mind, because we cannot build a house that is more narrow than is already contemplated. Otherwise, we'll be looking at a 12-foot wide configuration that looks like a mobile home. One other consideration about parking is that because there is no parking on Hemlock, I think it's worth taking a look across the street where tourists desiring to take a look and photograph Haystack Rock park in that parking space, which is not city property, belongs to I think it's a federal property. It's a forest property, but nonetheless, there's a parking area there, and people drive into that parking area, and then they cross the street and stand on the edge of Hemlock with their cameras and binoculars to take pictures of Haystack Rock. And of course, in doing that, they're often trespassing on our properties, as well as creating a traffic hazard when they have to walk across from the parking area onto the west side of Hemlock. And also, you received an email from Jeff Taylor, my neighbor to the north, and he may even be present to answer any questions that he may have, but he indicates his agreement that siting the house 10 feet to the east will relieve a view obstruction that he would have if the setback reduction is not granted. So Mr. Taylor gains view access as well as solar access and increased privacy by having the setback versus not having the setback made available. So if there are any further questions about any of the other points, I'd be glad to try to answer them, or Vito would as well. I trust that the consideration will be to the excellent staff report that has made the considerations of all the possible ramifications of the setback reduction. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I realize I missed a little point. Could you give us your mailing address, please? Or,
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. It's P.O. Box 1938, North Plains, Oregon 97133.
thank you very much. Does anyone have questions for Mr. Sorelli or Mr. Burton?
I don't know, this is Commissioner Bates. I don't know who answers the question. It looks to me, though, I do want to know, it looks to me like there's going to be quite a bit of excavation at the point where you at that 5-foot setback. It looks like you go down about 15 feet. Is that about right?
By the time you get to the base of the footings, it's going to be plus or minus, 12 to 14 feet by the time you get to the footings.
Well, I just looking at one of these, it said the garage floor finish would be 90 feet, and I couldn't figure out what the elevation of the slope behind the house would be, but it looks like about 105 feet. So you'll be carving out a significant amount of land, it looks like, and then spreading, I guess, all the way to the edge of the hill. It looks like a fairly big excavation project. Is that true?
It's a substantial excavation project. It's, and kind of going back to what Brent Burton mentioned is that without having access or parking off of Hemlock, it's essentially one of the only ways to get a driveway and parking on the site that would meet city standards. So yes, there would be excavation to get a flat portion for parking, and then also a slope that's reasonable coming up from the northwest corner from Center Street.
Thank you, Mr. Sorelli. And then the other question I had is the trees on that berm behind, on the east side of the property, what will happen with those? Will they survive?
We have not had a full arborist report of the site, but intend to keep as many trees as possible with the new build. And obviously, and we'd have to work with the landscape, but Brent has mentioned of replanting trees with the new build as well.
So-
I had a question about the away from the trees. I don't know if you had a question about trees. You mentioned a geotechnical report that had some cursory information about it. Is there any concern that has been raised, or is there a report? There wasn't anything included in the packet. It was a geotech report, but is there a report saying that digging down these 12 feet is going to be fine? that close to the right of way?
They did an initial study that did an investigation, and Brent might have better information on their report that it was done with the property purchase. But they did an initial study and then are waiting on the design or setbacks to do a fuller, deeper bores in those locations. But again, talking to them, I've talked to them verbally, and they feel confident we can come up with a foundation system that can anchor into the hillside.
You mentioned the flat area was more stable than the sections down below. What about that flat area, other than maybe, to someone who isn't a geotech, help me understand your statement as to why that's more stable than some of the spots down below, or what about that area up there makes it more stable?
I don't know if essentially, like, that would be a question, I guess, for earth engineers to talk about the stability of the site. It allows for a better building location with respect to the grades and access to the site. I think access and parking are the main driver in this design, is trying to get access to the property in a reasonable way that has slopes for a vehicle that are drivable surfaces. So the site, I think what I was trying to say is the site is split between, there's half the site is flat, and then it substantially drops off to the west, about halfway across the property from an east to west standpoint.
I'll tell you one of my concerns, and you can tell me why it wouldn't, why it might not be, why I shouldn't have it as a concern. The scale of the house, bringing it closer to the road, is concerning to me. I see a couple different possible roof lines that you've got in your drawings. And the reason I asked about dropping it down a little bit, if it's stable, again, I don't know that it is. Is you could put the parking above. You could have the parking maybe more toward where the house is now and bring the house down somewhat. Just as an idea, I'm not an architect, I'm certainly not a geotech. But if the concern is parking, as you just mentioned, maybe that's one way to address it.
I think it's all of our understanding that the parking can, I'm maybe confused about your question, but the parking cannot come off of Hemlock Street.
So it comes under there, yeah.
So I
Is that
guess
what you
yeah, can you explain to us the size of the dark gray on page 3 of exhibit A2? It says garage finished floor, and it looks like a really large space. Is that truly necessary under city parking requirements? Because it seems as though
No,
that's parking.
No, I mean, that's graphically a representation. It could be reduced, but just because of the severity of the slope, you would need to flatten an area so you could back out, so you could park and back out and drive. So you'd enter one direction and you need a space to turn around and then exit. It's too steep and challenging to pull in and back out in the same manner. So you would need some area up there where it says finish, like where it says garage
Right.
finished floor, that you would back up and then exit the same way.
Because I'm just wondering if we didn't grant the setback reduction, but the area of that parking spot was a little bit narrower, it seems like you could still achieve the same footprint.
You're saying if the house is in the location of the parking?
I'm saying let's say you had to stay with the same setback, the 15-foot setback. Instead of having to reduce the size of the house, which is what Mr. Burton suggested, it seems as though you could also reduce the size of the parking area, the width of the parking area, and not have to take size off of the footprint of the house. I'm wondering, is that technically infeasible for some reason?
It becomes very difficult with respect to entering and exiting this property. Just having the enough space that, plus or minus 20 feet, if you park at a grocery store or any parking space, like in a typical parking space in Cannon Beach, whether it's a residential or commercial space, a parking space is 9 foot by 18 foot deep. So that 20 foot was giving a little bit buffer because of the slope, but that 20 foot is hopefully enough room to maneuver out of the garage. So like a 20 foot drive aisle, if you will, like at the Fresh Foods parking lot, that would allow you to back up and then exit. So that would be similar to the maneuvering a vehicle.
All right, thanks for that.
I think we could reduce it not in the east to west direction, the right to left direction on this plan. I think
Mhm.
there's possibility to reduce it from the north to south, from the top to the bottom. Like it potentially doesn't need to extend out as far to the south, as graphically shown.
Right.
But every line, again, like going back to that 1 foot contour, you can see like every one of those lines represents a foot drop. So within that, plus or minus 10 feet from where we're listing the driveway slope, it's dropping, plus or minus 10 feet within that, 10 to 15 foot in length. So it gets pretty steep at that corner of the driveway where it's listed as like a 10-foot drive aisle.
But then why not just bring in your driveway further to the south? Why go right up that steep corner?
It's all steep. It gets steeper as you go down. Like the tighter the grid lines are, the steeper the slope. So if you look down to the south, down to the bottom, that's steeper than the north.
Yeah, I'm not looking at the very far south, but just a little further south. Looks to me like these grid lines get actually a little bit further apart, but maybe not.
I mean, maybe minor. We could swing it in a little bit, but I coming in at the cross sloping that with the angle that gives us, maybe we could bring the entry point to the flat parking area down south
Right.
a little bit to assist, but
I'm just wondering if that reduces your slope if you're going across the hillside a little bit as you're coming up, rather than trying to go straight up the hillside in essence.
yes, potentially we could bring it down a few, like 5 to 10 more feet down to the south. But again, like when you do the slope calculations, it doesn't like those help minor, but not like it doesn't make a dramatic difference in that driveway slope. It would assist a little bit, but not much.
What would be your guess by the difference in slope if you did that?
Well, this page that we showed is 20% slope, and then if you show it with no setback, I think it goes to 25 plus. Like it's greater than 25. So
And if you
it's-
brought the driveway further along the hillside before sloping in, do you think that that would reduce it?
I
by
think it would be a couple
10%?
degrees. I'd have to do the math, but I think it wouldn't be much more than a few degrees. I
Okay.
mean, unless it was all the way to the very, very, very south.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're cutting, then you're creating a driveway across the entire, like you're cutting and putting asphalt across the entire, or concrete across the entire site. So I think that would be more damaging and less appealing to the surrounding context of the neighborhood. Like I don't think that would fit into the context of the neighborhood as well. Like this keeps the most natural green on the site that we could plant and vegetate and, you know, put bushes or shrubs or trees. Like if you bring the driveway across the entire site, there's not that much green space left.
Other questions?
Before they leave, I just want to get a clarification from Stephen. Public Works is concerned. Is that the current status? Yeah. go ahead.
They haven't issued a comment. We did consult with both Karen and Trevor at Public Works. And they did express concern about the ability to access infrastructure in the South Hemlock Street right of way because of the potential proximity of the dwelling being as close to the piping as it would be. But again, they didn't issue a formal statement to that effect.
Thank you.
Is there more information from Public Works of exactly where that water line is? If it's right at the edge of the right of way, if it's at the edge of the road? Do we, just the GIS mapping as well?
That's the information that I have available, short of going through any system as built, which is way outside of my experience.
Other questions?
Not here.
Vito, there's in exhibit A2,
So,
comment? Vito, in exhibit A2, there's two representations of the roof line for the house. I must be looking at page, I think it might be 6.
5. Going on 5 right here. That it?
No, go down one. What page is that?
That's 6.
Page 6. Yeah. The upper roof line is a little different than the lower.
I think they're the same. I think what's happened is the trees making it look like, I think that the way the gradient's showing is like the trees making it clipped. So
Thank you. I thought that was an architectural feature. That helps.
There are two roof lines on page 5.
Mhm.
but they're the similar massing. It just, oh, are you talking about this? This is like showing the difference between a greater than, this is showing maximum building height. So it's showing like if it was under a 512 or greater than a 512, how high it would be with respect to the road.
And the purpose in that is just to demonstrate good intention to have a lower roof line. Was that why that piece is in
It
there?
was discussion like with the Taylors, like, and their views, and yeah, so they're going with a greater than 512, they're going to the 28 foot. So this is showing the maximum allowable heights with both scenarios.
I see. Thank you.
But yeah, the next page, they're identical roof lines, and for some reason graphically the trees are clipping the roof there. So
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Other questions? Okay,
can I add in something here?
of course. Yes, please.
Okay, yeah, Brent Burton here again. Listening to all the questions and comments, I really appreciate that. I'd just like to go back to the basics in the staff report, and that is that all of the criteria according to 17-164-010 have been met. And I could add to that the concerns about the water utilities and the driveway slope, any other factors that come in the building process, of course, we will be responsible to assure compliance and work with whoever we need to work with in order to make sure that these factors meet with the code requirements.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burton. Are there other presentations by the applicant or the applicant's team? Would anyone at this time, then we'll call for testimony from proponents. Nobody online?
If anybody's online, please raise your hand.
Okay, we'll move on to testimony from opponents. No one online? Okay, would the applicant like to make any final statements before we close the public testimony portion of this hearing? Okay.
I think my final comments I've already made, but I'd be happy to entertain any additional questions that you might have. But once again, it's my assurance that the project goes forward, and we will, with meticulous detail, address all of the concerns that have been raised, even those that are not directly related to a setback reduction.
And I would just like to add that, you know, this is a unique, challenging site with respect to the slope and the required access. And there's been effort taken to, you know, preserve the neighboring views, as well as, like I mentioned, keep as much green space on the site. I think that's a minor change if the driveway were to slide south, but I think it preserves more green space and natural space on the site. But again, just going back that this is a challenging site to gain access to, and one of the few ways that we've figured out a path to have a car enter and meet the city's requirements on parking.
Okay, thank you. This time we'll close the public consideration and move to our deliberation. Who'd like to start?
You know, I'm never at a loss for words. I do appreciate the work that the applicants put into this, and I do see the difficulty that the terrain creates, but I think Mickey hit on something. There is an exhibit in here that shows the property from the south, and it looks like if you move the house 10 feet, you've still got 10 to 15 feet of parking. It doesn't seem to me to be a really useful use of a setback simply to create a 20-foot parking spot. I also have difficulty, and I should have asked, how the stability of the property changes, the flat part, when you cut it down 15 feet. You just removed it. You know, so the stability thing doesn't make sense to me, but I should have asked that. But anyway,
I kind of did directly. We don't have a geotech though, so we were trying to make an assessment about that.
yeah. I'm kind of leaning against it. I do appreciate the efforts to talk to the tailors and design around their concerns. But in the end, it's a convenience that can be overcome. And the expense is going to be trees, as well as a potential issue with the water supply. And after this week,
Yes,
I don't think any of us want to mess with our water supply.
that's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would echo the concern, especially over the water supply.
yeah.
The reason that we have setbacks is to protect our utility corridors. That is a primary part of why each of us has setbacks on our properties. So I'm not exactly seeing that this is an impossible situation. They're still going to be able to build. It may be a slightly steeper driveway, but speaking as someone with a very steep driveway, I get in and out of it just fine. I do also worry we aren't, we're talking about the neighbors, but we aren't talking about what is it like to drive around that corner on the S curves. I mean, no matter what is going to change, but that is one of the few peekaboo views of Haystack Rock. And I think that's not to be taken lightly. And it's not written into the code as something we need to consider, but especially for the people who come here to visit. That's a pretty magical little turn on the S curves, I've got to say.
Bill, are you listening? Or I know you're there. Can you unmute, I guess?
Yes.
I have a question for you. Along the lines of what Mickey was just saying. When talking about impacting views of neighboring properties, how broadly does our precedent in law talk about what a neighboring property consists of? Is that public rights of way, or is it just strictly private ownership?
An interesting question, and what I'm looking at now is what the language actually says. And I suspect that it is broad enough to deal with that. Significant views of the ocean mountains or similar features from nearby properties will not be obstructed any more than would occur if the proposed structure were located as required by the zoning district. And the road is part of the property that's controlled, by the city. So I think you could interpret it to include roadways. I think you could also interpret it to conclude that it doesn't. I think there's some discretion in there.
Okay. Any other thoughts from people?
Well, so my thought about that is the phrasing of it wouldn't obscure it more than if it were to fall within the normal. Would it is this increasing obstruction to that view? Because it's still approximately going to be even if they moved it 10 feet west. I would
It
imagine.
might be different because the grade may be considered different once you go down the hill.
It's hard to answer definitively.
Right.
Commonsensically, it seems like what Mickey's saying would make sense as you fall down a
It's
hill.
considered their grade will be lower, so
Yeah.
they will only have 24 feet above that as opposed to sitting up here getting 24 feet.
Angles from the road will be better as the house moves back. So
My biggest concern is the no geotech report showing that the water line isn't gonna be affected by digging within potentially 5 feet of it, or if the water line's out in the middle of the road,
Right.
maybe it's 10 feet away, maybe it's fine, but we don't know where that's at, and we don't know how digging 12 feet straight down that close to the line without a report saying that that's the hill can handle that, especially during construction. Like once it's done, you'll have the stuff to hold it up, but during construction, is it gonna be an issue where we have loss of everything for the entire south half of Cannon Beach? I think that's our only water line going down to Pulvana, right? That's,
Yeah.
I think there's two there, right? One on each side of the road.
No, only
Was there just one right there?
One.
Okay. But that's it for the entire south half of Cannon Beach.
yeah.
Okay.
Aaron or Les,
Les, Aaron, any thoughts here? Liking what you're hearing, or you have something to add?
I agree with what Eric just said. I mean, I don't understand why the applicant did not bring a fully cooked geotech report, but that's my biggest concern.
Les?
Yeah, I would have to mirror that. The biggest risk that I could see is removing that much soil adjacent to hemlock. I don't know what else, how else to put it. I'm a little concerned about the trees, but I understand this is a difficult lot. I would like more assurance that that we wouldn't have any problems, with the water line or with the road itself.
Okay, I'm hearing enough of some themes here that I think, is someone ready to make a motion?
I guess the only option we have is I move that we not grant the setback reduction in this case. The applicant's always, welcome to come back if, things develop and it looks like, it's a better proposition for the city. But the motion is to not accept or grant the setback.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Commissioner Moritz,
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. Request is denied. Moving to our next item. Anyone need a break? All right, let's take a 2-minute break. You pick it up? Okay, our next item is a legislative matter regarding public hearing of ZO 24-01, city request for text amendment. Full code to chapter 17 zoning, ZO 24-01. City of Cannon Beach request for a text amendment to the municipal code, chapter 17 zoning. The request is for a general reorganization of the zoning ordinance and a combination with chapter 16 subdivisions. The text amendment requests be reviewed against the municipal code 17.86.070A amendments criteria and statewide planning goals. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the planning commission? And member believe he or she has a interest, I guess. Yeah, we could do that here. Does any commission member believe he or she has a conflict of interest or personal bias? Okay. Any ex parte contacts? Any commission members have ex parte contacts? Okay. How you guys feeling? Do you have that staff report memorized at this point?
Hey, we're bringing it back. We did some tweaks. I'm going to hand it on over to Marcy and let her take it from there.
Well, guess what? I'm gonna hand it over to Keith.
All right.
But I feel like the music, here we go.
Too.
Keith, you're up.
Okay, it's sort of like some razzle dazzle football player, right?
Exactly.
Sorry, reverse.
Down.
So as was indicated, the materials that you have before you, most of which you've seen once or twice before. I would say that the main piece that's new is Exhibit A6. We had some conversation about type 1 review, particularly type 1 review of development approvals that had been made by either the DRB or the city or the Planning Commission, and what kind of authority the planning director has to approve the final plans for those. And in Exhibit A6, we took a run at providing some amended language to try and clarify what the planning director has the authority to do under those cases. We received a number of suggestions. What we decided we wanted to do is really try to stick with some criteria that were as clear and objective as possible. Here we go. And so what we show here in red is, for the most part, added text. There are some things that were changed, but essentially for a type 1 action, which is a staff review of something that either is a simple process like a sign permit that meets all the sign requirements, would be an example. And then the other type of a type 1 review is where the planning staff and the director are looking at the final development permit for something that has been previously approved, either through a type 2 process, which is planning staff makes a decision, sends notice, and then a type 3 process, which is either a DRB or a planning commission decision. And so what we did add was that for the type, so we have the type 1 actions that are just automatically go to staff. And then for these reviews of things that have been previously approved by either the planning director, DRB, or planning commission, that he would review those final plans before you grant permits for building permits, grading permits, etc., to be sure that it all complies with the conditions of approval and that the amenities apply with the established minimums in the code. So this would be making sure that they still don't depart from the minimum landscaping standard or the maximum lot coverage standard and those sorts of things. So you would just do a check on the code to make sure that all complies. And then if there are any other conditions that are specific to this case, make sure that it applies with those as well. That's really the heart of it. One thing I would like to point out, if you could scroll down on this page just a little bit more, please. A little more. There we go. So in 060, we have determination of proper procedure type. And I would like to point this out, that this is telling the staff that when you're making a decision as to what procedure type an applicant needs to follow, that you are conservative in that you will go for the procedure that includes the most public participation or notice. So for example, if the planning staff is on the fence between, well, is this a planning director decision or should go to the planning commission or the DRB? They are instructed to go to the planning commission or DRB. So that's really supposed to be their marching orders as far as making those determinations when people come into the office, have a pre-application meeting, those sorts of things. And this is really pretty typical language you're going to find in a lot of codes, that the staff is given that discretion, but with the instructions that they are supposed to err on the side of the more inclusive process. So I know we had some other comments, and in your packet, you do have the copies of the emails we received from some of the other planning commissioners. And so I think we could probably just open it up and see what discussion you folks would like to have.
Great. Thank you, Keith.
I do have a question directly related to this, so if we can just pick up right where we are. So Keith, as I said last time, one of my main concerns is that we are codifying discretion to choose type of procedure. And I know that long-term, of course, the hope would be that we have a beautiful code that is so crystal clear that everyone knows who makes what decision. But until then, there will be a need to decide sometimes. But I think for the community, it's really hard to swallow that without some kind of sense of there being a check and a balance. So here, the way that this section A of 1714-060 reads, it says, the decision of the manager is not subject to appeal on its own, but may be alleged as an error in an appeal of a decision on a proposed development. This makes sense for type 2 and type 3, which have an appeal procedure. For sake of argument, what if an individual felt that a procedure was named type 1 when it should have been named type 2, and they want to appeal that decision? They're worried about the merits of the decision as well, but type 1 does not have an appeal process. Does that mean that we can't reach the question of whether that should have been a type 2 procedure?
I suppose so. Like I said, this is pretty common. And, you know, the staff, like I say here, is instructed to be conservative. So if there is any doubt, you know, move it up to the next level. Perhaps staff could respond also as to how you guys do it now. Because I assume that's the way you do it now.
I mean, a development permit, when we issue one, we still send out notice with an appeal aspect. You're trying to say, hey, I disagree with staff from the standpoint of whether it's a type 1 or 2, because in this sense, as the director, I'm making that type of decision. What's the appeal of that decision, correct?
So this is, I think this kind of came up with DRB and signage. I don't know if this is an open wound or not, but I know that there's been some disagreement between what staff decides and what DRB decides when it comes to signage. In that case, that's a type 1 decision.
Right.
By staff.
Yep.
What if somebody felt it should have been a DRB decision? So they can't reach that by appeal through this process. It was a discretionary decision, let's say, that it's going to be the manager or whoever he's delegated to has decided it's type 1.
Right.
Someone thinks it should be type 2 or type 3 under DRB. They disagree with the merits of the decision, but they can't get to it because it's a type 1 that's not appealable.
Right. Right. I don't know. I mean, if you have an answer, but I guess the one thing is what you would need to do in that particular instance is change the language of what's written in that particular section.
And that's exactly why I'm wondering if we can broaden the appeal process here until that section is clarified, because it is right now a little opaque.
I think it's pretty clear.
Well, people at DRB don't think that.
They absolutely don't, but I'm going to disagree with.
I'm gonna bring up so that I don't.
No, you're not bringing up, this is good discussion.
This is a perfect discussion point for a community concern.
Yep.
Could come up. So I'm just asking, is there a way for us to broaden the language here in section A that would allow appeal regardless of type? If there's a concern about both the merits and discretion that was used to decide the type. So it would just mean just changing the text very slightly here around appeal to say regardless of type, decisions are appealable if it involves a discretionary choice type.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good, it's a good comment. I think the only thing that is available at this point in time is someone who would have to appeal the development permit.
Right, and I think it would just be nice if we could say, hey, look, community members, you're protected in essence, you don't have to worry. You know, if there is discretion, there's an opportunity to question, was that?
The only other thing I can think of is, and Keith, correct me if I'm wrong. I think I've seen in other codes that there may be the ability to appeal a director's decision. I don't know if that's the same as the type 1 here. I know what you're talking about because I think where I came from, there was a section in the ordinance that discussed something that if you didn't agree with I'm just going to say because I'm in that position. Okay.
Yes,
when I say that,
get it. Yeah.
if you disagreed, and I believed in this case, the signs, that was, I believe, an appealable decision to say plan commission or a board of appeals or something else where I was previously. I don't know, Keith, if you're familiar with that. I don't know what the answer is exactly to your question at this point in time, during that meantime. But I think that there is a possibility of having that in the code at some point in time. I don't know what your thoughts are as to what we could do now compared to addressing it down the line as another appealable action.
And we could also just say decision of the manager is subject to appeal on its own and may be included with alleged error and an appeal on a decision. There are text changes that could be made that would make this.
Yeah, and I have no problem with the concept at all.
I don't think many people are going to argue it, to be honest, but it would give us, we're representing the community. The feedback we get is we're worried. And so I feel like our representative capacity is to try to bring some of those concerns here.
Sure. I would never have an issue with anyone doing that. The process is not an issue from my concern. So however we want to get to that point, if it's now, if it's later, we don't have any issue with the concept.
Thanks.
I noticed that Bill had his hand raised a while ago and then we kept going and I wonder if Bill, do you have something to add on that?
Not really. It seems like he came to a good resolution. I was just gonna provide some perspective that I'm not certain would help too much or make too much of a difference if given the resolution of the discussion.
Okay, great.
But I don't think we resolved anything, did we?
We didn't.
No, I think we did.
I think we did.
We can come up with, it's actually
Well,
deleting a sentence. It's like, instead of not, it is subject to appeal on its own. It's a one-word deletion.
And,
Right.
and is it saying who it goes to?
So don't we have an appeal process named here?
Here is the question I have. This determination currently is not set up to have any notice other than to the applicant.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've been talking about the citizens. And so, the question is, how do the citizens get to be informed to even appeal a determination as to what review process you're going to use? So then in a way, then we're creating almost another appealable action that's even before you've decided whether it's a type 1, 2, or 3. And I don't know if that poses some problems.
And I will weigh in on this one. I think if you're talking about appealing the procedures prior to the decision on the merits, that just makes the potential for an incredibly complex and convoluted process. Typically, if you have a problem with the procedures, you wait till the merits, and then that decision, you say the citizen sees that the planning manager makes a decision. Then once the decision is made, they appeal the decision. And part of that discussion may be this wasn't the planning manager's to make.
Right.
And I think that's how I envisioned it,
Mhm.
that no one's going to be concerned about choice of type unless they have an underlying material concern with the decision that was made.
I can think of some situations where
That won't be true.
there's enough of enmity between the parties that anything gets.
Right.
Hey, Bill, isn't the true process to amend the code? I mean, that is the process in terms of, if there's that concern, the decision's made. And then if a person doesn't like that, they could request a code amendment and take that through the public process to amend the zoning ordinance to say exactly how they would like the code to be administered.
Absolutely. I think Commissioner Moritz indicated that, ideally we get to the point where there are no more disputes. And I believe
that's not going to happen.
Yeah. So, the question is what happens when there is some ambiguity and, I think, just allowing for the dispute about the procedure to be part, and frankly, we can't, because of state law that says that procedural errors, so long as they prejudice somebody, can be part of, the process, what somebody can bring forward. We can't really prevent somebody from challenging if the city goes through the wrong process. The question is, how is that done? And I do think the language as is, it says, the decision about the process isn't challengeable on its own. And so let's say, Steve makes a decision, says it's type 1, I'm going to issue this. And the language in 1714-060A says the decision of the manager is not subject to appeal on its own is absolutely right. If somebody doesn't like that the manager made that decision, they appeal the manager's decision on the merits and say, you got the process wrong.
Go ahead, Marcy.
Isn't it possible that it could be used in the opposite way too? So if somebody didn't think they should have been subject to a type 2 appeal, they could, type 2 procedure, they could appeal it.
Absolutely.
Well, this is where typically, well, I guess we could do it, you know, they say it's sort of what's the remedy at that point and how do they show prejudice? The type 2, type 1, typically type 2 provides more notice, more opportunity to be heard. And so it's hard to find any prejudice. Maybe they would have preferred one decision making or over the other, but that's typically not something where you can show any type of prejudice for having too much process, essentially.
So what if we kept the language here and simply added discretionary decisions related to type can be raised for any type of procedure applied 1, 2, or 3?
My question would be by whom? And if it's the general public, does the city notify them? And then, I mean, you could potentially have an application that goes through double jeopardy. It gets appealed first on the process and then could get
No, this would
appealed
be-
next on the merits.
No, this would be going back to the language that right now requires that they be raised together.
I think the challenge is that type 1s have no public notice for the decision being made, so trying to include them within that, the only applicant would, the only person to appeal it would be the applicant.
But sometimes other people are going to know about the decision.
We post all of them.
Yeah, exactly. So there are.
Okay.
It's not required, but it is
Right.
posted.
It's not required.
Okay.
And I would point out the other part of that sentence, that the decision of the manager is not subject to appeal on its own, but may be alleged as an error and appeal of the decision on the proposed development. And that says you get to the process as part of the appeal on the merits, or you can get to the process.
I agree. I'm just worried about if it's a type 1 process, it doesn't even have appeal available.
And there's always an appeal, whether to LUBA or through writ of review, if it's not a land use decision. So that there's always going to be relief possible. It may not necessarily take it. It may require going outside of the city in certain circumstances, but there's always an opportunity for review.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is a helpful viewpoint or not, but I think about how we're approaching the tree code, and and we put a lot of effort into trying to make sure that there was adequate notice ahead of time, because you cannot uncut a tree. And so there's all sorts of public notice things that are new and improved, if you will. But this is, I mean, I'm thinking mostly on the sign instance, but in a more broad sense, once a sign gets put up or something that was an administrative decision, and the general public sees that they don't agree with it, signs can be repainted. I mean, I think as long as we assure ourselves that those kind of things that can be redone or corrected are appealable, then I don't see what the problem is. I don't think we need to let everybody know ahead of time what color the sign is going to be. I hate to keep using the sign as the example, but that's the one I'm familiar with. I just see a difference between a decision that's not correctable and then one that is, if it turns out we didn't do it right. That's all.
Thanks, Les.
Robert had.
No, I usually just raise my hand to pass on that somebody else has raised.
The unfortunate thing is, if you focus on signs, it's one thing. If you focus on a change to an approved plan, it could be something altogether different, right? Could be a larger proposition for the city. And I think that's why we keep coming back to this provision, in that there could be something very large in here that is more than a sign or landscaping. It could be moving a house, closer to a property line, or doing it in a way that a tree gets affected. Who knows? It's those things, and I think we're trying to get at those things, at getting notice out on those and getting getting the appeals taken care of. So it's not everything, Bill, that could fit under a type 1 for me. It's a very specific situation where it's a development plan, somebody's coming in with a change. I do appreciate the work you put in, project amenities comply with the minimum standards or the minimums. But that really isn't much clarity when we're really talking about standards and requirements. So at the very least, we should fix that bit. If you agree that those types of situations should eventually go up on appeal, I honestly believe you could take those plan changes out of this section, and they will come in and be dealt with in accordance with whatever the provision of the code that applies to it is. And we don't go through all this stuff, and we get to a situation where they get appealed when somebody doesn't like it, or they don't get appealed. But putting it in here as a type 1, really, I think is going to cause concerns among the community. So just take it out and the issues go away. And you guys deal with it when it comes in. Is this a type 1? Is this a type 2? Is it a type 3? And don't try to put it into type 1 just by virtue of the fact that it's changed to an established plan, approved plan. Does that make sense? You reserve all of the discretion, and the city, the community reserves all their rights.
I think the type 1s are spelled out exactly what's gonna be, type 1, type 2, type 3. We have to make a decision as to what a person is going to do.
You retain that decision.
Right.
But by calling automatic changes to an approved plan, calling them automatically type 1, where they could be type 1, type 2, or type 3 in reality, just doesn't work. Just take that out of this provision, and then you deal with those when they come in as the applicable district or based zone requires.
Whether it's in or out, it's gonna be managed the same way.
I know, but then we don't get stuck in a situation where the notice gets when they should, the public gets no notice when they should, and appeals are taken away.
Whatever you guys wanna do.
Okay.
So you're saying increase the ambiguity?
It's not increasing ambiguity.
Well, the explicitly written ambiguity, even though the decision is a known decision at this point, that they're taking the discretion of the changes and deciding, and this is spelling it out.
And then when they issue a permit, if somebody says, hey, wait a minute, that's not a type 1, it's a type 2, they can appeal. But I'm just talking about those changes to an approved plan.
That's a type 2 decision, and that would have to come back to whoever board made those decisions. It's very infrequent that we are going to get someone bring us something that's a change that we're gonna be like, oh yeah, it don't matter what they said, or
Yeah, so let's take it out because you just acknowledged it'll probably be type 2. So why put it in here and call it a type 1? And that is the ambiguity.
I think maybe we're misunderstanding the process here. What we're talking about is an approval has been granted by either the planning commission or the DRB or the planning director previously. It'll be specific about what the plan is, what the conditions of approval are. They come in with their final plans to get their building permits, grading permits, whatever. And the staff just goes through the conditions and they compare it to the plans that the applicant wants the city to sign off on to start development, to make sure that they're consistent and meet all the requirements of the decision that was granted. And if it doesn't, or if it requires a new approval, let's say, for example, they change their plan and now they want to cut a few more trees, or they want to expand it more or something else. Well, then it just kicks it into probably a type 3 process, goes back to the original approval body. So I think it's pretty straightforward. The staff cannot improvise on this. I think another thing that's going to be important too going forward is if the planning commission or DRB have some very specific concerns or see certain elements of the project to be really critical, be sure you have a condition of approval that makes it very clear to the staff, this is what we expect.
Keith, what you described to me is gonna happen just by virtue of the code, whether we put this provision here about pre-approved plans or not. The code will direct, it will direct that change to a pre-approved plan into one of these processes, type 1, type 2, or type 3 by itself. We don't need to say changes by their very nature or type 1. I don't know what it adds to put the restriction, provided they comply with everything. Because of course, if they don't, there's a problem. So I mean, it goes to type 2, the permit is released and somebody appeals it. So putting it in here just creates ambiguity.
So I guess my confusion, I didn't realize, maybe
Understand what he's talking
maybe I'm alone in not realizing this, but the decisions, so we put on conditions of approval, you have to put the driveway here, you have to do this, or whatever we put in our conditions. When the plans are redrawn, this is what we're talking about. When the plans are redrawn and brought back, the director then looks at those plans and makes a determination whether or not this is a type 1 approval to approve those plans as we directed.
It says in here, it's a type 1.
Yeah, but that's what this is saying. So that's the decision that is being laid out here specifically, is the approval of the conditions of approval.
I don't know, and Keith or Bill, jump in here. I don't know if it's quite saying that, because if those conditions were set by the design review board, the plan commission, the council, whomever, it's our responsibility to administer the condition as written. And I guess what
it's the decision, it's the approval of the plans that follow those conditions. Is that the decision that we're discussing right here?
I don't know, because I'm not quite sure. I was thinking it was just a general type 1 decision that we're capable of making that someone disagrees with.
I'm struggling, honestly. I'm really struggling to keep up.
I'm glad
I'm with you. I'm there with you.
Totally.
So, and maybe this is just a terrible Band-Aid. Can we go to something we know didn't work?
Sure.
The sign. I'm better with case studies. What happened there? You said it was pretty clear to you. DRB said it wasn't. Can you walk us through
Sure.
what happened there? So
I'll read you the specific section. Freestanding signs are subject to review by the design review board. The review shall be conducted as a non-hearing item. It doesn't say wall sign. It says freestanding sign. There's nothing in here at all that says wall sign shall be approved by the design review board.
okay, just to make sure, stop sign is freestanding, wall sign is on the side of the building, or?
Correct. So I'm gonna add some context to this, to this. What we had is we had an application that came in. They had 2 signs on the same application. One was attached to the building, the other was going to be freestanding. We forwarded the freestanding sign to DRB for review. We handled the building mounted sign as an administrative review under the provisions of 56, the sign code. And so because the building mounted sign is not required to go to design review board, it did not.
Okay,
Discussion was, if they were both coming in at the same time, design review board would want to review both of them. The wall and the freestanding, but that's not how our code reads. Our code strictly reads freestanding signs will go to the design review board. So I don't have any problem with signs going to design review board. We just need to change language.
okay, so there's,
So I feel confident
no, I'm not.
in.
Arguing, I'm just saying it was an example,
Some kind of example of that discretion
Yeah.
and where.
right? That's where we got lost in what felt discretionary to some people.
And it's not even really about the sign, it's about the process behind
It's
it.
about the process.
Well, that's,
I mean, and I think the concern was that DRB wouldn't have approved the wall sign the way it was. Aesthetically, their standards, they would have applied a different standard to the wall sign. So it was both material and procedural.
Yeah,
but that particular example. Well, I guess it would, yeah. I mean, if we have 1, 2, or 3 appeal it, we could have gone there.
Right. But they couldn't appeal it if it was stuck in type 1.
I would argue, though, your problem sounds like it's in the code standards for signs, not in this
Oh,
section here.
I think we all agree. There's no question about that, but the time it's gonna take us to get signs. There are probably 50 examples, maybe 100. This could
Well,
arise.
you said something earlier I want to come back to. You said this, you didn't use the word stopgap, but you said this
Right.
might be something we put in just until we do get this addressed.
Right, like to me, this is just. Yeah, it's a backstop because we have a plan to address these concerns in the way that they should be. Because Steve, you're absolutely right. The result should be, we go make the code amendment. How many times are we gonna do that and how many years does it take to make each amendment each time we find that there's an ambiguity?
And we're still gonna have ambiguities, even. if
Yes, we are.
As things happen, you're gonna find things out that we missed.
Well, definitely.
That's just the way of the zoning ordinance, you know, it just happens.
I hate to tell you this as your consultant, but there is no such thing as a perfect code.
Yeah.
Oh, you're
So
shattering.
we'll try our best, but there's no
Yes.
such thing. It's at the end of the rainbow.
We're always gonna have discretion.
Yes,
The challenge is, to what level do we allow that?
right. That's exactly the question. And maybe
So-
this is something for city council.
I think I'd put that on city council. As we talk through it here, I'm like, man, I could see it both ways and it just,
Yeah.
it's a really
It may
tricky one.
be more appropriate for them.
Yeah,
If we're gonna go down that path, Keith, just that word amenities is an undefined term. I think if you put in standards and requirements in the base zone, it probably would, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, specifically, how does that?
So on B2B,
Yeah.
Project,
the project manager is, and having that say the standards of the base zone.
I think we could just say this, the project complies with the minimum standards established by this title or is modified by the condition of approval.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. That sounds good to me.
I don't know if you're done with that, Mickey,
I
are
am.
you okay with it? I have a couple questions and it gets down to, you know, trying to codify what we've done.
Right? So, oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, Steve.
Sorry.
Let's make sure we resolve everything before.
No.
Okay, you know, there were just floating through what you provided us 14, 17, 16 and 17, 14 with the changes. There's language in here that, you know, I'm gonna read out for you. It leaves me with an impression that perhaps enforcement of the code isn't the priority once you get through this, as opposed to just making sure the building goes. And I'm just gonna read some provisions and then circle back. The first is in 17-14-030A in the first sentence. It says, type 2 land actions are presumed to be appropriate in the relevant zoning district. I think it's just a really ambiguous statement, but as a legal matter, it almost sounds like it's changing the burden of proof, which I know it can't. But for making a case when something goes to appeal, what was the intent of that? The next one, though, let me just read them all. The manager, this goes down to required documents. The manager, however, may waive copies of specific documents, maps, or exhibits upon a determination that the difficulty or burden of copying outweighs the usefulness of the copies. Very discretionary, very, not clear and objective. The next one, upon determination of completeness, applications shall be accepted. So that package comes in, and in the next sentence, 17-16-030E, rejection by the manager for incompleteness shall be based solely on failure to address the relevant standards or apply required information and shall not be based on differences of opinion as to quality or accuracy. That astounds me that would be put into a code. The next one, 17-16-030F. If an applicant receives a rejection based upon incompleteness, it may object in writing and to any alleged deficiency and direct the application to be processed. So, I mean, all the way through here, there is an assumption that the applicant provides something and you can tell me it's wrong. Manager, checks and boxes, doesn't look at it and cannot look at that information because they can't challenge accuracy and, what was the word? Quality. And that, everything from that point on is pushed to, directed toward, at that point, you guys have lost all control of the process. And if any decision you make, the applicant's going to come back and say you're operating on a discretionary policy and we don't like it. So some of these things are totally new to the code as I understand it. And I'm not saying it's not our process, but I'm not sure they're appropriate to put into a code. So I'd like to go through them and just understand why it was that they were added, and then perhaps we can either dispense with my concern or move or change things, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the first one, 1714-030A, type 2 land use actions are presumed to be appropriate in the relevant zoning district. What was the intention of that?
The intention there is type 2 reviews are things for allowed or permitted uses in the zone. So the idea is if you say it's a permitted use in the zone, for example, you're presuming that it's okay, as opposed to a conditional use where you think that generally it might be okay, but we might have reasons to deny it because either the impacts are too great or something of that sort. So that's why you have the difference between permitted and conditional. So
Good, I'm glad I'm
2's
asked. Could you put in just that permitted uses? Type 2 land actions are appropriate for permitted uses in the relevant zoning district.
Yeah, some of those things would be maybe not necessarily a use. So it could be, I don't remember what your tree permit process is. There might be some other staff might have something in mind. I can certainly say that, but I think that it's, you might have some things that aren't in the category of a permitted use in the zoning district.
That's fair enough. We should be, precise as to what we mean here and get it in. The presumption language almost sounds like, again, the standard on legal burden of proof.
Okay. Well, let's see, where were we again? This was 030.
1714-030A. 1716-030A. The manager, however, may waive copies of specific documents, maps, or exhibits upon a determination that the difficulty of or burden of copying outweighs the usefulness of the copies. What was the intention there?
This is just to address different situations where somebody might, there might be something that's just general information. We don't need to have them submit copies of requirements, but that's something we could take out. It's something that you often have in a code, but I don't think that one's particularly critical. Some of these are really just geared towards giving the staff some flexibility as to what gets accepted for the application. We'll get to some of the other ones later that you had some questions about too. But if you want them, that one.
How about 1760-030E, rejection by the manager for incompleteness shall not be based upon differences of opinion as to quality or accuracy.
That's right. That one I think I agree with because, you have this, staff can attest, you have this situation sometimes where people want to do the minimum on the application and you'll even tell them as staff, look, this isn't really quite enough. If you want to get an approval, you're going to have to provide more than that. And if that's all they want to submit, then their chances of getting denied are about 100%. So,
but this doesn't say that, Keith. This says they can't even ask about the quality or accuracy of the reports. Pretty much.
that's correct. And then when you review it, you can decide, well, the report isn't accurate enough, or it's not good enough, or you get something from the applicant's representative, Geotech or whatever, and you don't think it's good enough, you can either get another one or, you know, look for some other data to see if what they've given you is accurate.
I think it's saying the opposite.
It's saying just the opposite. And if you add in 1716-030D, it says the determination of completeness means that the proposal is, or the application has been accepted. That's the permit issues. Then it goes down here and says rejection for incompleteness shall not be based upon the quality or accuracy of the data. So if I'm an applicant, I'm going to come in and make sure that all my documents have the right titles, give it to you. And then when you start asking questions, I'm going to say, no, you can't do that.
Okay,
Yeah,
again, this is fairly common language, but if you want to delete it, we can delete it.
Can I ask, this is not required by law, this standard of review, is it? Is
mean
there
for
anywhere written in state law that
For
planning-
completeness? For completeness?
that a manager can't ask about differences of opinion as to quality or accuracy?
I think what this is to prevent is the staff from filtering what they think is accurate and sufficient to the point where an applicant can't even submit something to be reviewed, say, by the planning commission or the DRB.
Well, that's a question of balance that I'm sure our staff is qualified to handle.
Right.
But
And-
this puts into law that they can't even ask questions.
Okay, like I said, we can amend it.
I think maybe part of the concern is that we have the 120-day goalpost rule. So if we get a really lousy application with large inaccuracies, not enough detail, it's considered complete and we're rushing to go through it. So I think I am sharing Mike's concern that if planning department can't say, look, this is insufficient because we know this is inaccurate, or we think the quality of this is super poor, we get into this deadline and suddenly we're trying to backtrack to get a hold of reasonable information. And we also then end up having to push a project through simply because we're under a deadline. So that
I would disagree with that. You could just, as the decision maker, decide if the information is not sufficient, here are the reasons, and deny it.
that would be one way, but we've gotten stuck in this corner before where we do our best to ask for more information, to give the applicant time to come back with information, and then we're holding up the process. So there's a balance somewhere. You're right. We could just turn around and tell every applicant, we're not continuing this hearing, you're denied, come back later. We're trying to not be the no board. You know, we're trying to work with applicants, but it does create a problem if the packet is really lousy.
Right.
Well, I don't know if I'm reading the same way as Mike now, and I've read it like 5 or 6 times here. It doesn't preclude the manager from informing the applicant that this application is not detailed enough. They can still, as the staff can still tell them, hey, I don't think this is you don't have enough information in here.
Well,
It is technically complete.
I agree with you, but what happens was when they say it's complete, the permit issues, and only way that question gets raised is somebody has $600 burning a hole in their pocket to appeal it.
If you just, the language.
I don't think that's correct, because the approval authority can just deny it because it doesn't have either the information is correct or they don't agree with it.
But Keith,
This is about just, do you bring in an application just because the staff doesn't have the same opinion as the applicant?
So I've got a potential case study example that might feed into this kind of quality of information or difference of opinion. Generally speaking, when we receive a building permit application, those applications come with a plan set that is prepared by either a professional designer or by an architect. That being said, that is not a state requirement. it can, and we have had plans come in, they're definitely the exception, not the rule, but we have had plans come in which were prepared by a designer, hand drawn on graph paper. It met the criteria for approval, release for review. We couldn't sit there and say, oh, well, I don't like the fact that you hand drew this, even though all the lines are straight, and you got all your measurements, you've got your calculations with it, it's been through structure, it's been through all the stuff, and it is a reviewable application. See, in that case, we do take it because it has all of the stuff to be complete. I may not like or prefer hand-drawn applications, but it is an acceptable document. That being said, if somebody came in with something sketched on a shingle, then it would be, no, this is not complete. This is absolutely not adequate. It doesn't have sufficient information.
Right, but if you were to, let's take a different example. Somebody comes in and says, the border on my property is 100 feet by your GIS from the stream. We all know GIS is inaccurate. This would eliminate the need for anybody to go and measure that distance themselves to see if, because you can't question the accuracy. You can't come in and say, no, it's only 50 feet. Go ahead.
If you just struck the one part that says, and shall not be based on differences of opinion as to quality or accuracy, just strike that part.
I don't know, Marcia, let's look at it.
Yeah. The rejection by the manager for incompleteness shall be based solely on failure to address the relevant standards or supply required information. Acceptance in that application is ready for review. It seems like that gives plenty of ability to the staff to say this does not meet the relevant standards or supply. It's it's on a shingle.
Yeah, if you take it out, I'm happy with it, if you guys object.
No, I don't care.
And then this last bit where upon rejection for incompleteness, the applicant may object in writing to any alleged deficiency and direct the application to be processed. What would your response be in that case, Steve? Would you say, oh, no, I'm not going to do it? Or would you say, okay, I'll process it the way you've demanded?
It's kind of an interesting question. I think at that point in time, and I might ask for some input from Bill on this one, but I think what I'd do is we would accept the application at that point in time, and we would be making a recommendation or informing design review, plan commission, or council of our concerns about the incompleteness and how we had informed the applicant that they hadn't provided what we felt was sufficient information to make a good decision. And then the board would probably have to make a decision based on that.
Well, let me ask if it were a type 2 that maybe, should have been a type 3 because it was requesting a variance, but there was a small ambiguity in the code. So you would issue the permit as a type 2 and note in your staff recommendation that it really should be type 3.
And like I said, on one of those that would be coming to a board.
So at that point, you would just direct it in.
We would probably act on the application at that point. I would probably, like I said, I'd probably consult with the attorney a little bit in terms of where we're at and what we should be doing. And if there was direction that at that point in time, we should move forward with it, we would accept it and note that to everyone, all the decision-making bodies, that staff has a concern that the application is incomplete and we should either table it and wait for additional information. I'm sure they would argue to you that we are incorrect, and that decision would have to be made.
What is?
You would take it out of type 2 and kick it into type 3. I had that kind of question. Because we're talking about if this is a type 2 that is on a department decision, what does that look like if you have a lousy application, basically?
Bill, do you have any input on that? Because typically what we would do is say it's incomplete and not act on it until we felt it was complete. So I don't know what. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, the completeness of an application is controlled entirely by the applicant by state law. And it's easy to kind of confuse completeness with consistency with the code. But completeness, frankly, it's somewhat, application comes in the door. City has 30 days to review it, type 2, type 3, type 4, I guess not type, anyway, type 2 or type 3, let's focus on those. And they have 30 days to review it and says, it is incomplete. Here's the 7 things you need to provide. At that point, the applicant has 3 choices. They can say, all right, we're going to go do our stuff. We're going to get back to you in, 3 months with all this information. Or the applicant can say, we've looked at your incompleteness. Here's 3 of the 7 things you need, but we're not going to give you anything else. Or they can just tell the city, pound sand, we gave you everything you need. You need to make a decision. And at that point, the city has to make a decision. It is not, they don't have the ability to say, no, it's still not incomplete. At that point, if it's a crappy application, the city reviews to determine if there's enough evidence to show that all the criteria are or could be met. If so, it approves it. If not, it doesn't. And so if it's an awful application and it doesn't have their information to show that the criteria have been met, the city rejects it if the applicant says we're not giving you anything else.
I can give you an example. Forest Lawn, the bridge.
Mhm.
They came to us and they said it was a footpath that didn't need a conditional use permit. We said, yes, it did. Informed them of that. And then had to deny that type 2 application because we did not believe it was meeting the criteria. Then subsequent to that, they made the decision to change their plans, come to you guys without the setback. It was denied then, and then came back and provided the 5-foot setback that eventually got approved. So that is an example where that exact situation happened.
So if it happens that way, what's the point of even putting this language in? What does it accomplish? All it does is encourage somebody to say, Steve, I disagree with you. Why put it in? Can we take it out?
Is there still staff direction of how to handle that without that?
They just said how they handle it, yeah.
Well, but I mean, is
Yeah, it's
it
good to have
codified,
it codified, though. Yeah.
the staff direction?
It seems worthwhile to have direction for staff, if nothing else, so they can point to the applicant and say, here's our procedure.
Yeah.
This is what we do, I think
But
it's pretty tough to have an empty hole there.
on this one that they can demand, okay, so then, and the staff can either, well, I guess what does it say?
Sounds like that's state law in the first sentence of F.
Okay, then let's leave it.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't hear that. Hey, can I ask just a couple more quick questions and I'm done? There's a couple of provisions in there, 1714B3, 1714.050C. To me, they're new processes. One gives the manager to bypass the planning commission on quasi judicial post-plan amendments. I don't know what those are. I think it's, again, the approved plans. And the other one says suggests the manager can bypass the planning commission on legislative matters. And, I don't have a problem with that. It conflicts with Title II, Chapter 12. So I'm wondering what the intention of those 2 provisions are.
I'm sorry, you rattled those off so fast.
Yes, 1714B3,
1714, what are the last 3?
B3, oh, I'm sorry. I don't,
what's the numbers after 14?
Yeah, what page are we on?
1714, well, I'm working off my own notes here, so hang on. 1714. Oh,
04.
I see what I'm missing.
I think it's 04.
040 B3.
Okay.
What is the concern with B3 again?
I'm just, it suggests in the following are type 3 actions. Oh, and then you go down to C. So the quasi judicial plan amendments are included in type 3. Resolvable, go down to C, resolvable by the planning commission or design review board after a public hearing, except that the city council shall decide type 3 actions for quasi judicial plan amendments.
But isn't that how we do it now?
I don't know.
We make a
What is-
recommendation.
I don't know what a quasi judicial plan amendment is.
Okay, so here's the distinction. So if it's a quasi judicial plan amendment, you're talking about something like a zone change and a comprehensive plan change designation for a specific
Okay.
property.
Okay.
As
Alright.
opposed to, we're gonna change our comp plan and affect a number of different properties all at once.
Okay, I understand that.
So
Thank
these
you.
are the ones that, it affects the plan, but it's still for a very specific geographic place, typically a parcel or maybe a couple that are together. So most of the time, any kind of a plan amendment is going to be a type 4.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Does that help? Okay, good.
Yeah, that helps. It's perfectly acceptable. And then 1714-050C. So the type 4 action shall be decided by the city after public hearing. That's process, I guess. The city council may also request that the planning commission hold a public hearing in advance of the city council hearing. I thought that's what we did in every case.
And that's what we do.
Yeah.
Yep. So that would be just like we're talking about this reorg right now.
Yeah.
It's coming to plan commission first for the recommendation and then getting sent to council. So council gets it to you first.
Should that first sentence say city council
It should.
after the public hearing?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
just the city?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mickey had suggested that earlier.
Oh, all right, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Fascinated.
Oh,
I'm finished. Thank you.
Do we want to have quasi judicial plan amendments defined? Is that, I was just looking to see if it's a definition. I mean, it would be useful.
It would be helpful.
It's not in the definitions, really? Oh,
We check.
No,
Quasi.
unless it's not in the definitions that are included in the spec. Unless it's already in the definition. I know this is
yeah, that phrase is only included in one page.
It might actually just be kind of defined in the procedural section, if I'm not mistaken. That spells out the procedures like we just talked about. It might not be in the actual definition. So, I mean, I guess it's something that it doesn't hurt
Yeah, it would help.
to have it in there. But I think in the procedural section,
And the phrase quasi judicial plan amendments isn't included anywhere else in the book.
okay,
It's just, it's on one page.
I think where it ends up being in the existing code, it talks about 1788 public deliberations and hearings. And there's a procedure that talks about mailed notice, quasi judicial, legislative, how it, so and then it's not like formally defined, but procedurally it tells you how you go through that process, but it's not a definition. So I don't know. I mean, I guess,
Just cross-reference that section, right?
Yeah, we could.
yeah.
No, it's just cross-reference it.
Oh, I see a place that it's not the full phrase plan amendment, but what is it? It's 1794-050 classification of actions. It defines it as a zone change that affects limited area but has limited number of property owners.
So one could cross-reference that section.
Yeah,
I think so.
it's a partial definition.
Yeah.
One other thing I noticed was just it seems like the notice out on a proposed the 250-foot notice that you provide at the beginning of the permit the application doesn't match the the notice you provide afterwards. I think you have it in at 100. So the notice out at the beginning is 250 feet, the notice out. There are two distances in there on notice.
There are different notice provisions as far as distances.
Okay.
And certain
Does no action generate 250 and then a subsequent 100? Foot notice?
no,
No.
it would be the same, a same action.
Mhm.
Let it
At the same,
let it go. I just wondered about it. It wasn't a big deal.
we have specific, it's in here. I can find it in just a minute, but I know there are different distance requirements for different actions or quasi judicial.
Thank you.
legislative.
Mhm. Thank you.
Other people have comments? Okay. Let's come back to where we started.
Right.
Make sure we're all on the same page. Sip of coffee. Mickey, you had a great opening concern. Where did we leave that? Or where do you think we left that?
I think we left that sounds like a bigger issue than we're gonna address here. City council can take it up in their deliberations in terms of what do they feel is appropriate to allow in the way of appealability.
And how do
And
we,
I'm okay with that.
how do we want to let them notice them, I guess?
Exactly. How will we provide them notice about appealability? No. You know, I can write a brief public comment for myself when the time comes.
Okay.
I don't think we need to make it a planning commission communication, in other words. I can personally flag it.
And we could take that like we're gonna do the next thing we're gonna speak about.
There you go. That might be a more appropriate way to have that conversation than in a
Sure.
full hearing when
And like I say, I don't have a problem, but I just think if we can get it in there, it's gonna be the best way for everyone's perspective.
So we can have that conversation. I think you're right to try to flag it for our next joint session.
Sounds good.
Mike?
I don't mind. I think you agreed upon some small language changes. It'll just float through, correct? Thank you.
Yeah, at this point, I really feel like this does need to move on to city council. I think we've answered our questions and I think it's time to put it into a place where an actual deliberation can happen.
Hold that thought for one just moment.
Okay,
Any other comments from people before we maybe move to motion? Yeah, Mickey, that was a really good sounding motion.
so I move that we recommend to city council that they consider and adopt this plan for reorganization of our city code.
Second,
I second it.
any further conversation? All right then, Tessa, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Motion will move to city council. The planned amendments will move to city council.
Is it appropriate for me to ask a question at this point? I'm just kind of interested in a straw poll, like a hand rate, or how much more work do people feel that we'll need to do about the procedures section to get it right in this code rewrite project?
I think we're really close from my perspective. I clearly have the largest sort of outstanding concern. And again, I think this could be done in a sentence, right? But we have to have a conceptual conversation, I think, and I think it is correct that this is appropriate for city council to weigh in on, because it really does come down to what is the level of appeal that is appropriate.
But I'm not necessarily talking about just the action that you're taking this evening, but in the arc of the whole code rewrite project. You know, clearly it's identified tonight that there's some things that need to be fixed to make the whole system work better. The sign code was a really helpful example, you know, how freestanding and
Right.
when things come in together, fix that so that it doesn't have a procedural, it doesn't
Right.
become a procedural problem.
So you're saying in the rest of the code,
I'm kind of curious, like how big
how Robert deal with this the most. So I'm guessing you probably have some perspective on it.
I don't think there are a lot of things out there, but obviously we're gonna talk about some different uses and some of the different zoning and procedural, how that happens, when we start talking ADUs and duplexes, that's a bigger conversation in terms of who's gonna review what. So I think I don't got a great answer for that, but I think there are lots of little small things, whether it's short-term rentals, whether it's signage, things that I think are really general tweaks in a way that can go a long way. So, I mean, Robert and I, when we're doing our meetings, we'll give some input and I'm sure it'll be back to everyone else, like we've done here to review. But, I think procedurally we're getting close.
I think we've got a good skeleton. As you said, there's gonna be a lot of tweaks as we go along and catch.
And a lot of the procedural stuff that we're discussing is getting corrected in each section. So the wetlands, there's wetland procedural stuff that's getting corrected in the rewrite of that. The discussion with the trees, the way tree decisions are made is getting, the procedure for that is getting corrected in the tree rewrite portion, and housing with duplexes, ADUs. I imagine.
This takes time.
I imagine.
Yeah,
so it's
parking will
not
be the last big
necessarily
one.
procedural overhaul, but
Yeah, parking will be a big discussion.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think there might be a couple, I intend to, I hope, bring something in on our riparian code, which still has a 10-foot buffer for our streams, and I think that needs to be fixed. But that's, I think, going to be relatively small, the way we're discussing it, by tacking it onto wetlands and then creating an exception for salmon habitat that is governed by state and federal law. So that's a small one, Mars, I think. It depends on how people feel about it, but.
Right, so I am hearing that we'll get a lot of these, we'll catch up.
Yeah.
Be forced to fix them as we go through.
Yes.
These continue to force to be fixed. But maybe some of these little orphan ones, like the sign, we could just keep a running tab.
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
Okay,
And there's some things that I'll highlight and get to you that, hey, these are some things that, whether it's those, and it might just be stuff like you're talking about that has been come up. And again, maybe there's ways of cleaning it up based on some of those discussions. Like I said, I don't have any issues in terms of making changes, but it needs to be in here in order for me to say, yeah, I agree with that.
Right.
major progress, I think. I mean, I know that this was a hard and kind of boring, hard to really get involved in. But I think it's been really good for people to dig into the procedures. Because I think it will serve us well as we go forward on the policy pieces.
Thanks.
Thank you for.
And thanks for your work, and thanks to Keith.
Yeah.
Patience with our questions.
And you guys too, and the staff, and, you know, I mean,
Yeah,
filling the hole.
appreciate your input too, so thanks.
Processes take time and they can be.
But actually, these conversations, they get into the weeds, but I think it will clarify how we work as a commission better.
Yeah.
Because we are gonna understand our part in this in a different way.
Yeah. And we all bring our own unique
Mhm.
ways of thinking about
Right.
it. I think Eric and I are more kinesthetic. I gotta touch it. Give me a sign.
Exactly.
Anyway, okay. Let's move on to the tree report.
Up the February tree report. So in the month of February, we only issued 2 tree removal permits. One was for construction at 143 East Nana, a total of 4 removed with a required replanting of 4. And one was a hazard tree at 232 East Van Buren with a requirement to replant 1.
Thank you.
So I brought it up before the meeting, but I've been asked by a number of people about the tree that's topped but not removed.
Correct. The one at the.
Or Nazina.
Correct, one of the S curves. We've addressed this one a handful of times. There was a tree removal permit issued. Our understanding is that the applicant has previously started the process of kind of limbing that tree up, but they haven't completed removal of the main stem.
Okay,
So I don't know what their intention is to do that. I would suspect as they go through the construction process, that will eventually be completed. They just haven't done so yet.
okay, yeah, because there's been a number of people ask me, why is there a tree with a single branch sticking out of the top of it, but obviously is not going to survive that conceived.
Anything else on that tree report?
That was a good tree report.
Thank you.
Let's move to good of the order. Anybody have any items for the good of the order?
I have one, unless we have work session on trees Tuesday, I believe. I think we're pretty close. I mean, we've met once with council, and we'd like everybody to try to make it if they can, because, you know, if we get a good response on the approach, we've determined that, you know, the pop-up process is very different for trees than for wetlands, which would allow us, assuming everybody lines up, to move forward with notice in turn within the city to go. So we'd really like to get your comments, everybody's comments on the tree code as we get to that point. And I think on the second is the best opportunity for us to all discuss it. Les, by the way, will be back, and he knows that tree code inside out. He's, yeah.
And it'll go through the same process we're talking about that we've done for wetlands and for the code reorg.
Yeah.
This did.
Yeah.
So it'll come to, you know, it's kind of a discussion at plan commission council, have that discussion. And then once they kind of just say, hey, yeah, this seems to be good or whatever, at that point in time, we can start moving forward with the zoning amendment text change to that section of the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
And one item. And I didn't know if last time we had talked about Mickey putting together some a memo discussing some of the points that the plan commission wanted to forward to council as part of the packet when they received the wetlands section. So I had sent copies out to everyone, and I thought at the last process, it was just kind of going to be one of those ones that we'd bring back to plan commission, make sure everyone was okay with what the document or the memo stated, and then we would just incorporate that as plan commission's a memo from plan commission to council with the I think the two items, the uses allowed in the wetland lot of record and the status of the impacted buffer areas. There was discussion on that from applicants, and the thought was, hey, let's raise the point, which you did, both plan commission concerns and kind of people in public testimony, and let's forward that to council to make them aware that these were concerns that were brought up and that they should address that.
Yeah.
You have a copy.
Yeah. How do we have a couple days to look at it, or a day? What?
It was one of those ones where, sure. I mean, I guess if you're
done,
Hey, Robert, will you just pull it up? Let's go through it right now.
Yeah.
I think it'd be nice.
Yeah.
let's see here,
In the folder.
let's see, I forwarded, if anything,
Oh, my email's gonna take forever to.
yeah, I don't know if I should, if you want. I mean, there's one of two ways we could do this. If everyone wanted to take a look at it and just say, hey, guys, yeah, this looks good, just let me know. I don't think it was a form. I don't think it, I don't think it was like a formal action item.
I appreciate the confidence.
It wasn't a formal action item. It was more of, hey, we'd like to make them aware of these concerns. It's a memo from Plan Commission that you guys already recommended the wetlands, but it's more, hey, here were a couple issues that were raised. We want to make you aware of them. If I'm misstating anything.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay, so we all have that memo. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just had a question about one sentence in the memo, but if you.
Yeah, let's look at it.
I think it's time to.
Let's do it now.
So the.
Oh,
Yeah, I think.
that's,
haven't memorized.
Here, I can tell you what, let me.
We'll share it.
Should I, okay, you're good.
Yeah, well, if you go.
Let me print a couple.
So the question I had is probably strictly semantics. The planning commission received these comments at the time of their findings meeting. I think we received the comment to that, not at the findings meeting, but at the meeting prior to the meeting that we made the decision. Or the meeting for that.
The
meeting.
Graves,
Yeah, because I
the
think we received the
Graves
same comment
comments we
twice.
received twice, but I think that we basically got two comments before we had two findings meetings, right?
Oh, maybe that's what I'm thinking. The two
Yeah.
findings meetings. And
So
it was
we-
the first findings meeting we received.
Right, and the second one, we got another.
You guys may have to share this.
Yeah, no problem.
Blinking in some color.
Question is that we had not,
working.
at the time that we deliberated
Okay.
and made our provisional recommendation.
Owner.
I think if we
Okay,
had, we
alright.
would have had a record of that. Had more
Okay,
conversation.
because I remember asking about it.
I think in the first.
I must
finding-
have the first one. and
I don't think we can,
Didn't
That's what I
clearly
think
state my
it was.
question in the second meeting.
Yeah.
So those are both findings meetings.
Right, we had two meetings about this because we had some follow-up. The first time there were still some edits to be made before we actually adopted.
Okay, and that was my only concern with it. It was, I wasn't sure if it was during the findings meeting or if it was during.
It was not during our public deliberation.
there we go.
Deliberation.
Thank you. That's, thanks, Rob.
Nothing's super important.
No, but we need to
For
be
that,
accurate.
but
It's always, it's super important.
yeah, that was the only comment that I
Yeah.
had. while
I think my main
reading
concern
through it.
was that it was clear we had not received these as public comment before public deliberation.
Okay.
So, we all have these. Does anybody need more time to look them over? Okay. Well, does anybody object to us putting them in with the findings?
No.
Okay. Sounds like it did. Let's just do it. Okay.
So basically what'll happen is when they, the council gets the staff report, that'll just be an exhibit from plan commission to them as testimony, or as part of their review when they're considering adoption of the wetlands ordinance.
Yeah. Perfect. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, we are adjourned.